I remember the exact moment. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where we had laughed over burnt pancakes and argued about bills, when he looked at me with eyes that weren't the ones I fell in love with. They were blank, tired, hollow, and then he said it. I want a divorce. I've already spoken to my lawyer. I think it's time you talk to him too. There was no fight, no screaming, no attempt to fix anything. Just silence, that kind of silence that breaks something inside you. I couldn't respond. My tongue felt heavy, and my heart suddenly didn't belong to my chest. It dropped somewhere beneath me. I walked out of the room mechanically, as if my body knew something my mind couldn't yet process. The next few days blurred. I went through the motions, cooked dinner, packed lunches for the kids, even folded his laundry, out of habit, out of denial. I kept asking myself, wasn't this the same man who once cried at our wedding vows? Who couldn't sleep unless my head was on his chest? Where did we go so wrong that the only answer left was a lawyer? The emotional abandonment had started long before the words, "I want a divorce," were spoken. Now I could see it, how he'd stay longer at work, how his phone was always face down, how intimacy had become almost a memory. But I blamed myself then. Maybe I wasn't exciting anymore. Maybe I was too predictable. Maybe motherhood had changed me too much. I had no idea how deep he had already sunk into someone else's arms. It was 2 weeks later, while going through our shared iCloud files to get tax documents, that I found them screenshots. Love notes, dinner reservations, a trip to Montreal, all with her. Her name was Jessica, and according to one message, they'd been celebrating 1 year of love. 1 year. That meant while I was planning our family vacation, he was planning hotel stays with her. I confronted him, not with screaming, but with quiet rage. "Who is Jessica?" I asked. The guilt didn't show. He just sighed, like I was inconveniencing him with my pain. "It just happened." He muttered, "You and I have been disconnected for a while. She understands me. She understands him." As if I hadn't spent 11 years learning every part of him. As if our 2 children, our late night talks, our healing from his father's death meant nothing. It wasn't just infidelity, it was erasure. He had rewritten our story while I was still living in it. Talking to his lawyer was the coldest part. The man was polite, efficient, and utterly detached. He'd like to keep things amicable. He told me, as if we were deciding the price of a car, not the breaking of a home. I felt invisible, like my grief was a business transaction. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal, it was the questioning of my own reality. How did I not see it? Had I been so emotionally dependent that I ignored every red flag? I replayed conversations, looked through old texts, and realized how much I had convinced myself he was just tired from work, when in fact he had stopped loving me long before he found the courage to say it. The healing was not pretty. I cried in the shower so the kids wouldn't hear. I stared at my phone, tempted to text him things I'd never send. I wanted closure, but closure never comes from the one who broke you. It comes from the moment you stop needing answers. Now, a year later, I've started rebuilding, not just a life, a self. I take solo trips. I laugh without guilt. I sleep across the whole bed. Sometimes the silence still stings, but it no longer screams. And most importantly, I've stopped confusing someone staying with someone loving. Because love doesn't abandon quietly. Love doesn't hide behind lawyers. Love doesn't cheat. It started so subtly that I almost missed it. At first, it was just a few less kisses in the morning, fewer "I love yous" before bed. I told myself it was normal. After over a decade together, the spark doesn't always burn the same way. Life gets busy, work, kids, bills. Who has time for candlelight and long conversations anymore? But something about the silence between us started to stretch wider. Where there used to be comfort, now there was distance. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt like I was reaching for someone who was slowly backing away without ever turning around. He wasn't angry. That would have been easier to notice. He was indifferent, detached. Our conversations became more transactional. What time's the parent? Teacher meeting. Did you pay the utilities? What's for dinner? We used to talk about dreams, our childhoods, places we wanted to travel. Now, the emotional space between us was filled with practicalities, but the body remembers what the heart tries to ignore. I'd lie beside him at night and feel cold even when his body was next to mine. There was a time I couldn't sleep without his arm around me. Now I couldn't sleep because of the ache of its absence. One day, I realized he had stopped noticing the little things: my new haircut, the fact that I wore his favorite perfume, even when I cooked meals he once raved about. I remember standing at the sink, doing dishes, and watching him scroll through his phone on the couch, completely lost in whatever world existed there. I wanted to throw the plate, not out of rage, but out of desperation. I was drowning in silence, and he didn't even look up. I blamed myself for months. I thought maybe I had changed too much, that maybe motherhood had made me forget how to be a wife, that I had let routine kill romance. I bought new lingerie. I tried to initiate conversations at dinner. I suggested date nights. His responses were always the same: I'm tired. Work's been stressful. Let's just watch something and relax. But even when we sat side by side, our screens glowed brighter than our connection. Looking back, I can see how emotionally absent he had become. It wasn't just distance, it was a kind of quiet resignation. Like he had already left me in his heart, but hadn't found the courage or maybe the convenience to leave physically. He still showed up for the family dinners, the school functions, even smiled in photos. But when I looked closely, his eyes weren't in it. He was performing the role of husband, but not living it. I remember one Sunday morning, we sat on the porch, drinking coffee. It used to be our favorite ritual, just the two of us before the kids woke up, wrapped in quiet. I tried to talk about how I was feeling, how I missed us. He nodded politely, said, "Yeah, I know what you mean," then changed the subject to the weather. I felt like I had just opened a vein, and he was commenting on cloud patterns. That moment stayed with me, the moment I realized I was pouring love into a container with no bottom. Even intimacy became a transaction. It wasn't passion, it was obligation. I could feel his body next to mine, but emotionally, it was like being with a stranger. No lingering, no eye contact, no warmth. Just silence afterward. And when I'd try to talk, he'd pull away saying, "Let's not overthink things." I started asking myself, am I being dramatic? Is this just how marriages evolve? But deep down, I knew. Something had cracked. He stopped calling me during the day. We used to text little updates, pictures, jokes. I began to notice how often he was working late or stepping out to take a call in the other room. I didn't want to be suspicious. I wanted to trust him, but the emotional distance had grown so much that I felt like I was in a one-sided relationship with a ghost. I tried to hold it all together for the kids, for the life we built, for the woman I used to be when we fell in love. But it was exhausting carrying the emotional weight for two. People often think that cheating begins with sex or flirtation. But in truth, it starts with silence, with withdrawal, with the moment someone starts sharing parts of themselves with someone else that used to be reserved for you. And though I didn't know it then, I had already begun losing him long before I discovered the truth. Long before he ever said the words divorce, I had felt the goodbye, not in his words, but in the absence of his attention, his touch, his investment in us. I just didn't want to believe it. The morning he told me he wanted a divorce didn't come with a warning. There were no fights the night before. No signs that something big was about to be said. We were sitting at the breakfast table, him with his coffee, me trying to get the kids ready for school, when he looked up. Not with anger, not with guilt, but with that same detached calmness he had been carrying for months. And just like that, he said, "I've decided I want a divorce. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You should talk to him too. My first instinct wasn't to cry. It wasn't even anger. It was shock, the kind that makes you question if you really heard what you just heard. I remember blinking at him like I didn't understand English. I just stared at him. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching myself in someone else's nightmare. What? I asked. He didn't repeat it. He just said, I think it's better for both of us. No emotion, no conversation, no context. It wasn't a discussion. It was a decision, a conclusion he had already arrived at, one he clearly didn't think I had the right to participate in. My hands were shaking. I felt my throat tighten, but I managed to ask the only thing I could think of in that moment. Is there someone else? He paused not long, just enough for me to read everything I needed in that silence, and then he said, This isn't about someone else. This is about us not working anymore. But his eyes couldn't hold mine. And in that moment, I knew. Maybe not the details, maybe not her name, but I knew deep in my gut that he wasn't alone in this emotional departure. He had help walking out of our marriage, even if it wasn't official yet. I couldn't even process the betrayal fully, because I was still trying to wrap my mind around how cold and clinical the whole thing felt. It wasn't just that he wanted to leave, it was how little regard he had for how it would impact me, or our kids, or even the life we had built. It was like he had removed himself from the story entirely and left me holding the torn pages. He handed me the business card of his lawyer later that evening, like he was giving me the number for a plumber or a contractor. I didn't say anything, I just took it. My pride wouldn't let me break in front of him. That night, I went into the bathroom, locked the door, turned on the shower, and sobbed until my eyes were swollen shut. Not just from the pain, but from the way he stripped the ending of any dignity. No therapy, no attempt, not even a conversation, just legal paperwork and indifference. The next few days passed in a haze. I went into autopilot, packed the kids' lunches, answered emails, made dinner, but I felt like a ghost floating through the life I used to belong to. I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house made me jump. Every silence between us felt louder than words. I'd look at him across the room and think, who are you? Because this wasn't the man I married. That man cried when our first child was born. That man sat with me for hours when my mother died. That man once held my hand while we walked through a miscarriage. Where did he go? When did he stop being mine? When I finally called his lawyer, I expected at least a trace of empathy. But the man on the phone was all business. He referred to me as the other party. Every sentence was about division. Division of property, division of assets, division of custody. But there was no mention of the division of hearts. Of how one person can fall out of love and walk away, while the other is still holding the memories like fresh wounds. I was being processed like a transaction, like the years we spent building a home and a life were just items on a spreadsheet. What hurt more than anything was that he didn't fight for us. He had already emotionally exited the marriage, and now he was just tying up the legal ends. He didn't ask how I felt, didn't offer comfort, didn't apologize in any way that felt sincere. It was all too neat, too planned, and the fact that he had spoken to a lawyer before speaking to me made it clear I had stopped being his partner a long time ago. I had just been the last to know. Still, I kept hoping maybe he'd change his mind. Maybe he was scared. Maybe this was a phase. But he never wavered. He was calm, too calm, like someone who had already started a new life in his mind. And this one, the life we shared, was just a chapter he was ready to close. That's when I realized I wasn't just grieving a marriage. I was grieving the illusion that I mattered enough to him for a conversation, for a chance, for the bare minimum of honesty. And that realization was the beginning of a different kind of heartbreak, the kind that doesn't scream, but stays quiet, lodged deep in the chest, reminding you that not all endings are loud. Some are quiet disappearances. I couldn't let it go. No matter how cleanly he tried to end things, no matter how many times he repeated that this wasn't about another woman, something inside me kept pulsing with suspicion. There's a particular ache that comes from not knowing the truth, a gnawing restlessness, like a splinter in your mind you can't quite remove. He had been too prepared, too detached. A man doesn't emotionally check out of his marriage without somewhere else to emotionally check in. I wasn't just dealing with heartbreak anymore. I was now haunted by the need to understand what had really happened. Because deep down, I knew I didn't lose him to nothing. I lost him to someone. It started with the smallest details, things that only made sense in hindsight. There were receipts for lunches that didn't match his work calendar. Uber rides from locations I didn't recognize. Playlists on his Spotify filled with songs we never listened to together, mostly soft acoustic love songs. The kind you'd send to someone you're in the first stages of falling for. I once saw a notification flash on his iPad. Dinner was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. He grabbed the device so fast, so defensively, and muttered something about a coworker joking around. But I wasn't stupid. I just didn't want the confirmation. Then one afternoon, while clearing out our shared drive folder to prepare for the divorce logistics, I stumbled on a PDF he had forgotten to remove. It was a scanned itinerary, flights, hotel bookings, even dinner reservations. The name Jessica M. was listed as a guest. It was a trip to Montreal, dated 2 months before he told me he wanted the divorce. My breath caught. I read through it over and over again, hoping I had misunderstood something, anything. But there it was, a trip for two, planned with care, scheduled while I was home managing the kids, making dinner, waiting for his texts that never came. My hands were shaking when I confronted him. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just asked, "Who is Jessica?" And that was the first time he didn't lie. He didn't even look surprised, just tired, almost relieved, as if keeping it hidden had been harder than admitting it. "She's someone I've been seeing," he said, voice quiet. It started out as emotional support. I didn't mean for it to happen the way it did. That line, "I didn't mean for it to happen," stuck with me like glass in my skin. He made it sound like it was an accident, like he tripped and fell into another woman's arms, while I was at home, clinging to a marriage that had already collapsed on one side. He told me it had been going on for over a year. A year? That meant she was there while we were celebrating our son's birthday, while we were decorating the Christmas tree, while I was planning our anniversary dinner alone, because he said he had to work late. She wasn't just in his future, she had infected our past. And that betrayal cut deeper than I expected, because this wasn't just about sex. It was about intimacy, time, energy, things he had once given to me, now gifted to someone else in secret. I wondered what she knew about me. Had he told her I was cold, controlling, emotionally distant? Was I the villain in his story to make room for their romance? I couldn't stop imagining them together, the way he used to look at me, now directed at her. I saw her in everything, the scent on his shirts, the upbeat mood he'd suddenly come home with, even the cologne he started wearing, one I hadn't picked. I realized the nights he came to bed late weren't always because of work. The weekend he went on that conference trip and didn't answer my calls until the next day. That was her. I had been blind, but I had also been lied to with precision. But the cruelest part was that he made me feel like I had failed. He never outright blamed me, but there was a constant tone of justification in everything he said. We grew apart. You were always so busy with the kids. I didn't feel seen anymore. As if that gave him a license to find comfort elsewhere without telling me. As if I didn't feel unseen too. As if I wasn't drowning in silence, in the weight of carrying our family while he was emotionally relocating. There's a loneliness in betrayal that no one prepares you for. Because it's not just about losing the person you love, it's about losing the narrative you believed. I used to think we were just in a rough patch, that love meant pushing through. But love doesn't involve secret trips. Love doesn't require deletion of texts. Love doesn't grow in the shadow of lies. And realizing that shattered something fundamental in me, not just my trust in him, but my trust in myself, because I ignored the signs. I doubted my instincts. I let love blind me when the truth was always quietly waiting to be seen. In the weeks following the discovery, everything around me felt unfamiliar, even my own reflection. I would catch myself in the mirror and stare, not at my appearance, but at the woman I had become. A woman who had once built her entire world around a man who quietly stepped out of that world without warning. There were days when I couldn't recognize my own voice, when grief twisted so tightly around my throat that even breathing felt like work. Every moment I had previously shared with him, every birthday, every late night laugh, every mundane errand run, now felt like a betrayal, like memories poisoned in retrospect. I wasn't just mourning him. I was mourning the life I thought we had, the version of reality I had protected and nurtured, while he lived a separate, hidden truth. The hardest part wasn't even the infidelity, it was what it did to my sense of worth. I kept replaying everything over and over in my mind, trying to find the flaw in me that made him choose someone else. I thought about every moment I might have seemed distracted, tired, stressed. I questioned whether I had given too much of myself to the kids, to the house, to work. I was so used to loving him loudly that I forgot to ask myself if I was being loved back at all. I'd sit at the edge of my bed at night, phone in hand, tempted to text him not because I wanted him back, but because I wanted answers he would never be able to give me honestly. The need for closure can be so consuming, especially when your story ends without a final conversation that feels worthy of what you lost. I went through all the phases: the heartbreak, the rage, the desperate late night internet searches for how to get over betrayal. I signed up for therapy, not because I was strong, but because I was falling apart quietly in front of my children. I didn't want them to see a mother shattered by a man who no longer saw her value. In one of those sessions, my therapist said something I'll never forget. "You're grieving a future that was never going to happen." That sentence hit me like a wave. I realized I had been holding onto a vision of us that only existed in my hopes, not in reality. He had stopped showing up for our marriage long before I ever saw the truth. Over time, I started reclaiming small pieces of myself, not in grand ways, but in the quiet rituals I had forgotten. I began taking walks alone, not to escape the house, but to hear my own thoughts again. I signed up for a pottery class just because I'd always wanted to. I said no to things that drained me, and yes to things that scared me. I cried when I needed to without apologizing for it. And perhaps most importantly, I let go of the idea that his betrayal defined me. What he did was a reflection of his choices, not my shortcomings. There were still difficult moments. Seeing couples holding hands in the grocery store would sting unexpectedly. Random memories would sneak up on me and bring tears, like the way he used to warm my coffee mug before pouring it, or how he would squeeze my hand 3 times to say "I love you." But eventually, I stopped romanticizing the past. I began to remember the way he avoided conflict, the way he never asked how I was doing unless something was wrong, the way his compliments had faded into silence long before his affair began. I started seeing the truth clearly, not through the lens of nostalgia, but through the clarity that pain sometimes brings. Months passed, and slowly, I realized I was no longer waiting for him to regret what he did. I didn't need his remorse to move forward. Forgiveness, I learned, wasn't about him. It was about freeing myself from the weight of anger that no longer served me. I began making decisions without considering what he would think. I stopped checking his social media. I stopped hoping he he'd come back changed. I stopped needing closure from someone who never had the courage to be honest in the first place. One morning, I woke up, and the house felt calm, not empty, but peaceful. I brewed my coffee, sat in the quiet, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt present in my own life, in my own body, in my own story. I realized I had walked through something that could have destroyed me, and somehow I had come out stronger, not because I wanted to be, but because I had to be. And in that strength, I found a new kind of love, not for him, not for the past, but for myself. A love I had been waiting for someone else to give me, when all along it was mine to reclaim.